What if the creatures history called impossible were hiding in plain sight the whole time? A real fire-breathing animal that science confirmed, a lost city found by a space satellite, and a government that secretly paid people to spy using only their minds. Today we are breaking down 40 more historical myths that turned out to be disturbingly real. This isn't mythology, it is history with a massive plot twist. 1. The real Bigfoot was a 10-foot primate that walked alongside our ancestors, and we have the fossils. Gigantopithecus blacki was a real ape, the largest primate ever documented, standing nearly 10 feet tall and weighing over 1,000 pounds. It lived in Southeast Asia and went extinct roughly 300,000 years ago, well within the period of early human migration through the same region. Its fossils were first found not in a laboratory, but in a Chinese apothecary shop in 1935, where the teeth were being sold as dragon bones and ground into medicine. The legend of an enormous, hairy, upright creature did not come from imagination. It came from a species our ancestors looked directly in the eye and survived to describe. 2. Every culture on Earth had a dragon legend, and science finally found the animal behind it. In 1912, Dutch soldiers in Indonesia filed reports of enormous lizards attacking horses and deer on the island of Komodo. The reports were dismissed until a Dutch officer shipped actual specimens to a museum. The Komodo dragon grows to 10 feet long, weighs 300 pounds, and kills with venom so powerful that a single bite causes bleeding that will not stop. It had existed on those islands for millions of years, while the outside world agreed dragons were fictional. China, Europe, Japan, Arabia, every dragon legend. The animal existed. The continents just never compared notes. 3. The Cyclops was not invented. It was a prehistoric elephant skull being misread by the ancient Greeks. The myth of a massive humanoid with a single central eye has baffled scholars for centuries. There is no human being with one central eye, but there is a prehistoric dwarf elephant whose skull has a single large central cavity directly in the middle of the face where the trunk was attached. To an ancient Greek sailor who had never seen an elephant skull, that cavity looks precisely like an enormous eye socket. Ancient Greeks found these skulls regularly in coastal caves. The Cyclops was not invented from nothing. It was a misidentified fossil and an honest mistake. 4. Every seafaring civilization on Earth independently invented the mermaid, and the explanation is one real animal. Pacific Islanders, West Africans, Scottish fishermen, Babylonian priests, Finneor, and ancient Chinese sailors all described half-human, half-fish creatures. The dugong is a large marine mammal that nurses its young by holding the infant upright against its body with its flippers and surfacing to breathe. Christopher Columbus wrote in his official ship's log that he had seen 3 mermaids near Hispaniola, and they were less beautiful than he expected. He was almost certainly looking at manatees. The most romantic legend in maritime history was a 300-pound, slow-moving mammal that eats seagrass. 5. The Thunderbird was a real animal, and its wingspan was wider than a small aircraft. Native American tribes across North America described a creature so enormous it created thunder with its wings. Argenovis magnificens was real. This bird lived in South America with a confirmed wingspan of 23 feet, larger than the aircraft the Wright brothers flew in 1903. It weighed approximately 170 pounds and soared on thermal air currents. In the deep oral traditions of populations migrating into the Americas across tens of thousands of years, a memory of a bird that cast a shadow the size of a room would not simply disappear. The Thunderbird was not invented. It was remembered. 6. The Smithsonian documented giant human skeletal remains for decades, and the physical evidence disappeared. Throughout the 1800s, excavators across the United States filed regular reports of enormous skeletal remains found in burial mounds, measuring 7, 8, and 9 feet in length. The Smithsonian Institution's own annual reports from that era reference the collection of these remains from mounds across the Mississippi Valley. Later inquiries found no corresponding specimens in the collection. A 1914 Smithsonian report references these remains. The physical bones are gone. One ancient Native American oral traditions describe a race of large people who preceded them in the mounds. The reports are in the historical record. The bones are not. 7. The United States government secretly paid professional psychics to spy on the Soviet Union for nearly 20 years. In 1978, the Defense Intelligence Agency launched a classified program called Stargate. It paid trained individuals to practice remote viewing, showing the claimed ability to perceive distant locations using only the mind. The program ran until 1995 and spent approximately $20 million of taxpayer money. It was fully declassified. The released files confirm that some sessions produced descriptions of classified Soviet installations that investigators could not explain by chance alone. The United States government decided the program was worth 2 decades of funding and kept it classified for 17 years. America paid psychics. America kept it secret. America has still not published a satisfying explanation for the sessions that appeared to work. 8. Japan buried hundreds of billions of dollars in wartime gold across the Philippines, and most of it has never been found. General Tomoyuki Yamashita oversaw the concealment of treasure looted from a dozen conquered nations across a network of tunnels and caves as American forces closed in. When Filipino laborers who dug the tunnels were killed afterward to protect the secret. This is not disputed. Japanese military records and survivor testimony confirm the program existed. A court case in Hawaii in 1996 produced sworn testimony that billions in gold had been secretly recovered after the war. The treasure existed. How much was recovered, by whom, and where it went remains a question nobody with the full answer is authorized to discuss. 9. The Oracle of Delphi was not performing. She was being gassed by the earth itself. For over 1,000 years, the most powerful political advisor in the ancient world was a woman who sat on a tripod above a crack in a temple floor in the Greek mountains and delivered prophecies in a trance. Modern historians called it theater. Then geologists studied the site. The temple at Delphi sits directly above 2 intersecting geological fault lines. Trapped in the bedrock beneath it are significant deposits of ethylene, a naturally occurring gas that produces euphoria, trance-like states, and altered speech at low concentrations. Exactly the symptoms ancient witnesses described. The crack in the floor was real, the gas was real, the trance was real. The most powerful political voice in the ancient world was a woman breathing geology and telling kings the truth. 10. King Midas was a real man with a documented tomb, and the golden touch was a metaphor for something even more extraordinary. Midas was a historical ruler of Phrygia in what is now Turkey, operating in the 8th century before the Common Era. He was among the first rulers documented to have introduced coinage, which is what actually gave him the power to transform everything he touched financially. When archaeologists excavated the burial mound near Gordion in 1957, they found one of the richest Iron Age burials ever recorded. The golden touch was a cultural memory of a real king whose actual tomb confirmed the wealth was never an exaggeration. 11. Robin Hood was almost certainly real, and his name appears in English court records as a legal term for outlaw. The court rolls of the 13th and 14th centuries contain multiple men named Robert Hood, documented as fugitives. A Robert Hood had his assets seized by the York court in 1225. The earliest ballads place him in Barnesdale, precisely where the court records find him. The name appears in English legal records as a generic term for outlaw so frequently across a century that the character almost certainly began as the documented name of a real criminal, not a fictional archetype invented by a storyteller. 12. King Arthur was almost certainly a real 6th century warlord, and the archaeological evidence has been building for decades. After Rome withdrew from Britain in the early 5th century, the island fell into conflict as invading forces pushed west. Ancient Welsh texts reference a warrior whose battlefield courage was already legendary by the late 6th century. Excavations at Tintagel in Cornwall revealed a 6th century fortress of unexpected scale, with a stone inscribed with a Latin name directly connected to Arthur. The round table and the magic sword are centuries of embellishment. The warlord underneath them appears in enough independent early sources that dismissing him entirely requires ignoring evidence historians cannot satisfactorily explain away. 13. Ghost ships were real, and the atmosphere itself was producing them. Sailors for centuries documented seeing vessels sailing through storms with no visible crew, glowing with pale light, moving against the wind. Prince George of Britain recorded a sighting of the Flying Dutchman in his personal diary in 1881. The phenomenon is called Fata Morgana. When a layer of warm air sits above cold ocean surface air, light refracts in such a way that ships beyond the visible horizon, 40 or more miles away, are projected upward into the sky and appear to float and glow. The ghost ships were real ships. They were just in the wrong layer of the atmosphere. 14. His sailors saw fire appear on the tips of their masts and called it divine protection, and physics eventually proved they were not wrong. Throughout maritime history, witnesses described a ghostly blue or violet flame materializing on the highest points of masts during thunderstorms. St. Elmo's fire is a completely real phenomenon called plasma, ionized gas that forms when a strong electrical field builds up around a pointed conducting surface during a storm. It appears exactly where witnesses always described it, at the highest, most exposed point of whatever is present. The sailors were not witnessing a miracle. They were observing elementary physics. The saints showed up as ionized nitrogen. 15. The 10 plagues of Egypt were almost certainly a chain reaction triggered by a single volcanic event 1,500 miles away. When the eruption of Thera, roughly 3,500 years ago, triggered an environmental cascade that corresponds to the plagues of Exodus in exact sequence. Volcanic ash contaminating the Nile would alter its chemistry and kill its algae. Dead algae drives frogs from the river. Dead frogs mean insects multiply. Insects carry livestock disease. Volcanic particulate causes prolonged sky darkening. Each plague is the logical environmental consequence of the one before it, and everyone is explainable through a single eruption in the Aegean Sea. The miracle was real. It was just a volcano expressing itself through 1,000 miles of interconnected ecology. 16. Victorian England had a medically documented epidemic of people being buried before they were actually dead. Certain medical conditions could produce a state indistinguishable from death for physicians of the era. European medical literature between 1700 and 1900 documented hundreds of cases of people prepared for burial who revived, some in their coffins, some in the mortuary. A market emerged for safety coffins equipped with bells and signaling devices operable from inside. Germany opened the world's first waiting mortuaries in 1822, facilities designed to hold bodies until death was confirmed beyond doubt. The Victorians were afraid of premature burial because it was genuinely happening. 17. An ancient wooden object found in an Egyptian tomb turned out to be a functioning model aircraft. A wooden artifact housed in the Cairo Museum and cataloged for decades as a ritual bird figure was re-examined by an aviation engineer who noticed the aerodynamics. The object has a flat-bottomed fuselage, upswept tail fin, and wings angled in the precise configuration of a modern glider. A working-scaled replica was built and it flew. Whether ancient Egyptians understood the aerodynamic principles is unknown. What is confirmed is that they produced a wooden object over 2,000 years ago that follows modern fixed-wing principles so precisely it generates lift when released. The Wright brothers flew in 1903. The Saqqara bird predates them by over 2,000 years. 18. The curse of Tutankhamun killed real people, and the cause was biological, not supernatural. When Howard Carter opened the tomb in 1922, several people connected with the opening died in the months and years that followed. Microbiologists studying sealed Egyptian tombs found colonies of toxic molds thriving on tomb walls in concentrations that would be classified as a biohazard in a modern laboratory. Opening a sealed chamber after 3,000 years of undisturbed biological accumulation releases a concentrated bloom directly into the faces of the people at the entrance. Lord Carnarvon had a pre-existing lung condition. The curse required no supernatural machinery. It needed a sealed room, 3,000 years, and someone who opened the door and breathed. 19. The most beautiful flower in European history is also the origin of the werewolf legend, and it can affect a person through the skin alone. Wolfsbane, the violet-flowered mountain plant called aconitum, contains a neurotoxin that can be absorbed through unbroken skin during handling. Contact produces a burning sensation, heart irregularities, and crawling numbness across the entire body. In larger quantities, it causes vivid physical sensations of the body changing, which medieval witnesses with no knowledge of toxicology described as transformation. Several accused individuals in documented werewolf trials were found to have had extensive contact with plants from the Aconitum family. The werewolf transformation was not always supernatural. Sometimes it was a plant, a person who handled it too long, and a village that had never heard of chemistry. 20. In ancient people who reported the ground glowing before an earthquake were recording a real and confirmed scientific phenomenon. For centuries, witnesses in earthquake-prone regions described columns of light and glowing sky before major seismic events. Scientists dismissed this for most of the 20th century. Then earthquake lights were captured on multiple independent videos during the 2010 Haiti disaster, and spectroscopic analysis confirmed they were real. The current explanation involves the compression of certain rock crystals along fault lines, generating an electrical charge that electrifies the air above and produces visible light. The Earth was warning them. Ancient populations noticed. Modern science required video evidence before agreeing. 21. A lost city that ancient scripture said God erased from the earth was found sitting intact under the desert by a space shuttle using radar. The city of Iram of the Pillars, what described in ancient texts as an advanced civilization buried for arrogance, was dismissed as allegory for centuries. In 1992, a NASA space shuttle using imaging radar penetrated the sand dunes of the Arabian desert and revealed buried roads, ancient caravan routes, and the foundations of a major settlement at a site called Shih. Excavations confirmed a substantial trading city buried when the cave system beneath it collapsed. A civilization mentioned by name in ancient scripture and dismissed as myth was sitting under the desert floor the entire time. It was found not by archaeologists with shovels, but by a satellite reading through sand from space. 22. The Amber Room, considered the eighth wonder of the world, was stolen by the Nazis in 1941 and has never been confirmed, found, or destroyed. The original room took Prussian craftsmen over a decade to build and was gifted to Peter the Great of Russia in 1716. 6 tons of amber panels covered an entire palace chamber. When German forces dismantled and removed it, the crates vanished in the chaos of the war's final years. Dozens of investigations have produced nothing. The most probable explanation is destruction in Allied bombing, but the room has never been confirmed as destroyed. A chamber worth over $500 million today is either ash or it is sitting in a sealed location that has not been opened since 1945. 23 ancient Egyptian medical texts prescribed honey for wound infections 1,500 years before the Common Era, and modern science confirmed it outperforms synthetic drugs in specific cases. Honey contains hydrogen peroxide produced naturally by an enzyme called glucose oxidase. Its water content is so low that bacteria cannot grow inside it, and it actively dehydrates infected tissue. When researchers tested raw honey against one of the most antibiotic-resistant bacteria currently threatening modern hospitals, it proved effective in cases where synthetic antibiotics had already failed. The Egyptians who packed honey into infected wounds 3,500 years ago were applying a substance that would pass a modern clinical trial today. They did not need the mechanism explained. They just noticed wounds healed. 24. Nature invented a real fire-breathing animal millions of years before humans began telling stories about one. The bombardier beetle produces 2 separate chemical compounds in 2 separate internal chambers and combines them in a reaction chamber lined with catalytic enzymes. The resulting reaction produces a boiling liquid compound ejected from its abdomen at 100 degrees Celsius with an audible popping report. It can fire in any direction, reload in microseconds, and repeat hundreds of times in sequence. The beetle is the size of a human fingernail. It shoots a boiling chemical explosion from its body on demand. Every culture on Earth independently invented the dragon. Every culture on Earth shared a planet with an animal that actually does this. And the dragon never needed to be supernatural. Chemistry reached that destination first. 25 Persian engineers built functional refrigerators in the middle of the desert 2,000 years before electricity, using only geometry and wind. The yakchal is a beehive-shaped mud brick structure built above an underground insulated chamber. Ice from nearby mountains was stored below in winter. The geometry of the dome created airflow that kept the interior cold through summer temperatures exceeding 100 degrees. Wind catchers on the surface drew air downward across the stored material below. The mud bricks, up to 6 feet thick, provided thermal insulation. The design kept food and ice frozen through the Iranian summer in one of the hottest inhabited regions on Earth, with no power source for 2,000 years. 26. There is a real medical condition that causes dense hair growth across the entire human face and body, and it was directly responsible for documented werewolf prosecutions. Hypertrichosis produces hair growth so extensive that in severe cases the entire face is covered. In 1537, a man named Petrus Gonsalves with severe hypertrichosis was presented to the French royal court. On portraits of Gonsalves and 3 of his children who inherited the condition survive in palace collections across Europe. He was studied, exhibited, and his children were given away to foreign courts as curiosities. When accused werewolves were prosecuted in 16th and 17th century trials, several of the accused almost certainly had hypertrichosis. The trial was a medical condition being processed by a legal system with access to neither a diagnosis nor any compassion. 27. A real sword has been plunged into a real rock in Tuscany since 1180, and it has not rusted in over 800 years. Galgano Guidotti was a 12th century Italian knight who drove his sword into a boulder to symbolize his renunciation of violence before becoming a hermit. The sword is still there, embedded to the hilt on a hillside above a medieval chapel. When a scientific team from the University of Pavia confirmed in 2001 that both the blade and the surrounding rock date to the 12th century, whether this site influenced the Arthurian legend or the legend influenced the act is still debated. A real sword sits in real Italian stone, untouched for 8 centuries. 28 ancient people who described the ocean, speaking before major disasters, were recording real sound events. The barrel guns are mysterious booming sounds heard over open water, reported for centuries and never fully explained. In 1997, a United States government monitoring network recorded an enormous unexplained underwater sound event picked up by hydrophones nearly 3,000 miles apart, making it one of the loudest sounds ever recorded. The source was eventually identified as an enormous mass of Antarctic ice fracturing. Ancient coastal populations who described the ocean speaking were recording real acoustic events that modern instruments now confirm and still struggle to fully categorize. 29. An entire human subspecies was erased from history and then found inside the living bodies of millions of people alive today. The Denisovans were identified not from a complete skeleton, but from a single fingerbone fragment found in a Siberian cave in 2008. DNA analysis revealed they were a distinct human species, separate from both modern humans and Neanderthals. Modern populations in Papua New Guinea and Aboriginal Australians carry up to 5% Denisovan DNA. The genetic adaptation that allows Tibetan people to live at high altitude without suffering oxygen deficiency was inherited directly from Denisovans. We did not just share the planet with them, we absorbed them, and we only discovered this 15 years ago. 30. Virtually every ancient civilization on Earth independently described a catastrophic world flood, and 2 geologists found the real event that likely caused all of them. In 1997, geologists William Ryan and Walter Pittman proposed the Black Sea flood theory. The Black Sea was once a freshwater lake isolated from the Mediterranean by a land bridge. Roughly 7,500 years ago, rising sea levels breached that barrier at the Bosphorus Strait. Water poured into the lake basin at a rate 200 times greater than Niagara Falls, permanently flooding an area the size of Florida within months. Farming communities living on those fertile shores were driven outward in every direction, carrying the same story. 200 flood myths from unconnected civilizations may trace to one afternoon at the same strait. 31. In 12th century England, 2 children with green-tinted skin emerged from the ground speaking an unknown language, and the explanation took 8 centuries to arrive. Medieval chronicles in the village of Woolpit in Suffolk record the appearance of a brother and sister who emerged from a pit, refused all food except raw beans, spoke a language nobody could identify, and had distinctly greenish skin. The girl survived, learned English, and said she came from a land of permanent twilight. However, modern medicine provides a credible answer. Hypochromic anemia, severe iron deficiency, produces a distinctive greenish pallor. Children emerging from a confined underground environment in extreme malnutrition would arrive speaking nothing recognizable, appear green from nutritional deficiency, and refuse unfamiliar food. The mystery was a nutritional deficiency hiding inside a fairy tale. 32. Scientists collected genetic material from the water of Loch Ness in 2019, and the finding was stranger than a prehistoric reptile. A research team from the University of Otago tested environmental DNA shed by every organism living in the water and found fish, mammals, and bacteria in expected proportions. They found no large reptile. They found an extraordinary and statistically significant abundance of eel DNA. The leading scientific hypothesis is that the creature is an exceptionally large European eel. A large eel surfacing with an undulating motion in low Scottish morning light, viewed at distance from shore, genuinely looks like a long-necked creature. The monster may still be in the loch. The DNA suggests it has fins. 33. A large winged creature was repeatedly sighted in one American town across 13 months in 1966 and 67. And then a bridge collapsed and the sightings stopped entirely. Residents of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, began filing police reports of a large winged figure near an abandoned military facility. The sightings continued across dozens of independent witnesses for over a year. On December 15, 1967, the Silver Bridge collapsed during the evening rush, killing 46 people. The creature was never reported in Point Pleasant again, and the most scientifically grounded explanation involves sandhill cranes, large birds with 6-foot wingspans and distinctive red markings, being misidentified by a community living near a former munitions facility. Whether something was watching before the bridge fell is a question no official investigation has ever fully closed. 34. Sinbad the Sailor's 7 impossible voyages were based on the real navigation records of Arab maritime traders, and the monsters were real animals seen for the very first time. Arab seafarers of the 8th and 9th centuries routinely sailed routes from the Persian Gulf across the Indian Ocean to China. The magnetic mountain that pulls iron from ships almost certainly refers to islands with high ferrous content that interfered with early compasses. The sea monsters are whale sharks and giant mantas encountered for the first time. The island that submerges beneath a ship is a surfacing whale. Sinbad did not sail once. Sinbad is the compressed legend of an entire civilization of professional sailors whose individual voyage records were eventually narrated as the adventures of one man. 35. The Phoenix myth appears on every inhabited continent independently, and every version traces back to a single real bird. The Egyptians called it the Bennu. The Chinese called it the Fenghuang. The Greeks called it Phoenix. The Arabs called it the Anka. All described a bird of extraordinary size and beauty that disappeared and returned in a cycle of apparent death and rebirth. The Bennu is almost certainly based on the giant heron of the Arabian Peninsula, a real species known from fossil evidence that stood over 5 feet tall, had striking plumage, and appeared in Egypt as an extremely rare visitor crossing the desert from the east. To ancient Egyptians, a 5-foot brilliantly feathered bird appearing unpredictably and then vanishing back across the horizon was genuinely sacred. The cycle of disappearance and return encoded in Phoenix myths across every unconnected civilization is almost certainly a migratory pattern being misread as resurrection. 36. Merlin was almost certainly a real 6th century man who walked into a forest after a catastrophic battle and was never seen in civilization again. The Wizard of Arthurian legend traces to a figure named Myrddin Wyllt, documented in 6th century Welsh poetry as a warrior prophet who lost his grip on reality after witnessing enormous carnage at the Battle of Arthuried in 573 and retreated permanently into the Caledonian forest. He was recorded living in the wilderness for decades, all composing verse that Welsh poets preserved for generations. The pointed hat and transformation spells are centuries of embellishment. The man underneath is in the earliest documentary record with a name, a date, and a documented breakdown. 37 ball lightning has been dismissed as hallucination for 2 centuries, and then scientists accidentally filmed it with instruments pointed at the right piece of sky. For centuries, pilots, sailors, and ordinary people have described the same phenomenon. A glowing sphere appearing during thunderstorms, passing through solid walls and windows, drifting slowly across enclosed rooms, and disappearing silently or with a sharp report. Scientists dismissed it as misperception until 2012, when a Chinese research team accidentally captured ball lightning on video and spectroscopic analysis. The spectral signature matched elements from soil, suggesting the ball was plasma generated by a lightning strike on the ground. The phenomenon is real. What sustains it and causes it to pass through solid matter remains actively disputed by physicists. 38, the real Blackbeard, was even more terrifying than the legend, and he understood something modern marketing experts still teach. Edward Teach cultivated a reputation so deliberately theatrical, it functioned as a weapon before a single shot was fired. Before battle, he wove slow-burning fuses into his thick beard and lit them, wreathing his face in smoke so that witnesses described him as a demon stepping out of hell. He blockaded the entire port of Charleston, South Carolina in 1718 and held it hostage, demanding medical supplies. When he was finally killed, eyewitnesses claimed his decapitated body refused to sink. One of history's greatest pirates understood that the fear of a monster is more powerful than the monster itself. When he engineered his own legend deliberately in real time, while the legend was still useful to him. 39. The world's greatest unsolved ancient mystery is a book sitting in a locked case at a university library that no living person has ever read a single word of. The Voynich manuscript is a handwritten book from the early 15th century, illustrated with drawings of unidentifiable plants, astronomical diagrams, and human figures, and written in a completely unknown script that appears in no other document in human history. William Friedman, who broke Japan's most classified wartime cipher and was the greatest codebreaker of the 20th century, spent years on it and never decoded a single word. Artificial intelligence systems from multiple universities have produced no result. After 6 centuries, the manuscript has produced 0 confirmed decoded content. Someone wrote every page deliberately. How we do not know what they wrote. 40, a signal from deep space arrived on August 15, 1977, matched every predicted characteristic of intelligent extraterrestrial contact, lasted exactly 72 seconds, and has never been detected again. Astronomer Jerry Amon was reviewing data from the Big Ear radio telescope at Ohio State University when he found a transmission 30 times louder than background space noise. While centered on the precise frequency scientists had long theorized an intelligent civilization would choose to broadcast. It matched every parameter of predicted contact so precisely that Amon circled it and wrote one word in the margin. Wow. Every telescope pointed at those coordinates since that night has found nothing. Every natural astronomical explanation proposed has failed to replicate the signal's characteristics. It was either the most remarkable coincidence in the history of radio astronomy or something transmitted once and stopped. The file is open. The signal never returned. And nobody on this planet can tell you with certainty which answer is true. So myths aren't dying, they're just waiting for the evidence to catch up. But here's the real question. What ancient myth do you secretly think is about to be proven real? Drop it in the comments. Because if history has taught us anything, it's that the stories that sound too crazy to be true are usually the ones that are. This has been Lying Legends, and I will see you in the next video.